What is going on, guys? Dublar back here with another Diablo 3 Season 10 patch 2.5.0 build guide. This time, bringing you a legitimate variant to the very popular and current Wizard solo meta, the CoE Archon push build. This new variant has already been used to clear a GR103 on the European servers, placing it within the top 10 globally. This is an interesting build that increases the damage potential of the current meta build at the cost of mobility and survivability. As with the other build, this is a pretty high skill cap build and is potentially harder to play than the current leader. However, theoretically speaking, the extra damage should allow it to push higher if you're able to roll the right rift. With that said, the different playstyle may suit other players better, so I highly recommend giving it a shot. So without further ado, let's get into the build. Before I begin, I want to give a shout out to user Horrax, who cleared the 103 that I mentioned in the intro and pointed out this build to me after I posted the guide on the CoE GR push build. I'll post the Diablo fans link to his full build guide in the details, which I highly recommend you go check out. I'll also post my own build guide link, which will give the full stat priority of the gear and will be updated if new skills or gear are incorporated into this build. I anticipate that if this build begins to gain more popularity, it'll change slightly, so check back there for the most recent changes. So getting back to it, since this is simply a variant, I'll only give a brief overview of the changes in the build. However, you can check out the CoE GR push build video for the full breakdown of the unchanged gear. One of the most noticeable changes in this build is the absence of the Aether Walker. This is the wand that lets us change teleport into a spender skill, allowing us to cast it much more frequently. Instead of the Aether Walker, we'll cube the Orb of Infinite Depth and run the Starfire in our weapon slot. The Orb of Infinite Depth will allow us to both increase our damage by 5% and decrease incoming damage by 15%. This effect can stack up to 4 times. This allows for a potential 20% increase in damage and a 60% increase in damage reduction. Stacks are easily gained each time we hit an enemy with Explosive Blast. Since we're going without the Aether Walker, the usefulness of the Ancient Parthian Defenders is severely decreased. Instead, something like Ashnagar's Blood Bracers should be ran for the shield buff. Side note here, lightning skill damage must be rolled on the bracers in order to ensure that you're dealing lightning damage while in Archon, thus proccing Mantled. Archon elemental damage is based on your character's highest elemental damage increase, and rolling lightning on the bracers ensures this. The percentage does not matter, as the damage from Mantled procs will not scale with this percentage. You can confirm that lightning is your highest rolled elemental skill on the details page. Another switch is Zay's Stone of Vengeance for Bane of the Trapped. This gives us the potential for a 15% damage bonus, as well as a movement speed reduction for enemies near us. The Convention of Elements and Mantled Heal will fill our jewelry slots, and Fazula's will be the belt. In the cube, we'll run the Orb of Infinite Depth, which we already discussed, the Swami for the Archon stat carryover, and the Ring of Royal Grandeur to complete our incomplete sets. Moving into skills, there will be 2 major switches. The first being the switch from Energy Armor over to Explosive Blast with the Chain Reaction rune. The second is changing the Teleport rune from Calamity over to Safe Passage. This will give us a 25% damage reduction after teleport. We'll still run Magic Missile with the Glacial Spike rune. This will give us a Cold Towel stack, and the freezing effect will serve as a Bane of the Trapped proc. Archon with the Combustion rune. This will serve as our main source of damage, and Combustion will serve as a fire stack, while Archon skills will serve as lightning stacks if we ensure that lightning is our highest elemental damage. Black Hole with the Spellsteal rune for the damage buff, and Magic Weapon with the Deflection rune for the damage reduction and weapon damage increase. Our passives will shift slightly, giving up Power Hungry for Galvanizing Ward. This will grant us with a shield equal to 60% of our life if we're able to avoid damage for 5 seconds. Evocation for the CDR, Unstable Anomaly for the free life, and Paralysis for the Mantled procs. Before we jump into gameplay, I want to highlight the major concerns with this build so you can see how to work around them. As I mentioned, The major trade-offs are the lack of survivability and mobility. As for survivability, this can be mitigated with smart shield management and good mob RNG. To do this, you'll need to retreat when Archon falls off and continue to cast Magic Missile for the shield buffs. You should try to grab the Infinite Depth stacks for the damage reduction, maintain Tau stacks for the resistance buffs, and try to maintain Galvanizing Ward. You will also have to closely manage your teleport, because it'll have a significant cooldown time and you cannot depend on it to get you out of a bad situation. Mobility is a different story, especially with the rework in mob types this season. The nice part about the APD build is the ability to skip entire floors when they're loaded with spearmen, ghosts, lashers, you name it. This can also be mitigated in this build, but it'll take good management of the remaining Archon time after the initial lightning cycle. Once the lightning cycle ends, you should try to take advantage of your remaining Archon time to find your next mob. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into this GR85 gameplay and break it down to give you a good understanding of how this build works. So right off the bat, the most important thing is to try to acquire the 4 explosive blast stacks before popping into Archon. This is what's going to give us that extra 20% damage and the real reason why we're playing this variant. Once the lightning cycle wears off, we should take full advantage of the leftover Archon time to locate our next mob. When we come out of Archon, we want to try to maintain our distance from the enemies to avoid taking damage and make acquiring the Galvanizing Ward buff just a little bit easier. We should also be spamming Magic Missile for the armor buffs, the Bane of the Trap and Gogok procs, and the crowd control effects. Again, after that lightning cycle is done and that elite is killed, we want to try to take advantage of the remaining time and the increased mobility we get from those free teleports. As we begin to near the end of the Archon cycle, we should be looking for a good place to come out of Archon that's going to allow us to pop out without taking much damage. Right here's a great example of one of the pitfalls of this build. I made a pretty bad teleport and quickly got surrounded by enemies. Luckily, in this case, I was able to get off spell steal and take full advantage of the cycle, but this really goes to show how having only one teleport can make it very difficult to play. Now that I'm outside of that lightning cycle, I'll go ahead and reset and try to build up a good group that's worth fighting. Even though I'm close to spawning the Rift Guardian, taking extra stacks into the fight is always a good idea. As we begin to near that lightning cycle, we want to make sure that we have at least our single cold stack. We should also begin to position ourselves where we can refresh the explosive blast stacks if we haven't already, and hit our target with Black Hole right before popping into Archon. If you have really good cooldown reduction, the ideal time to pop CoE is right at the end of the fire cycle to take full advantage of that Black Hole buff. Once we get the mechanics down, the build becomes much easier to play and is incredibly strong. The rest of the playstyle mirrors the normal CoE Archon build, so it should be very familiar to you guys that have been pushing with it already. Anyways guys, that pretty much wraps up this video. If you guys enjoyed it or learned something from it, please don't hesitate to hit that like button or even share the video with someone else. I'm always interested to know how far you guys push this build down in the comments, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to post them there as well. Also, don't forget to get subscribed to learn about my latest D3 content. As always, I wish you guys luck this season, and I'll see you in the next video.